The rain had already been falling long before the building noticed it. It moved slowly across the city, settling into gutters and ledges, finding its way down glass and concrete without asking permission. By the time night fully arrived, the streets were already dark with it. I arrived a few minutes early, like I always did. Not out of urgency. Just habit. The entrance lights cast a soft, tired glow across the pavement. They didn't try to brighten anything. They only made sure nothing disappeared completely. I stood there for a moment before going inside, listening to the rain find its rhythm. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady enough to let the rest of the city fade back. Inside, the building was quiet in the way offices get quiet after hours. Not empty, just finished. The kind of quiet that comes after chairs are pushed in and screens go dark, after the last footsteps echo away and don't come back. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something older beneath it. Paper. Dust. Time. I set my things down behind the desk and let my coat dry slowly. There was no rush. Nights like this had their own pace, and they didn't respond well to being hurried. Rain traced thin lines down the tall windows, blurring the reflections of streetlights outside. Each drop followed its own path, meeting others, separating again. The city moved on the other side of the glass, but softly now, as if it knew it wasn't being watched. I turned on the desk lamp, just enough to make the surface visible. The rest of the lobby stayed dim. It always felt better that way. Balanced. Some people find quiet unsettling. They look for something to fill it. A sound. A voice. Anything. I never did. Quiet, when it's allowed to settle, has weight to it. Not heavy. Just present. It presses gently against the edges of things, smoothing them down. I opened the logbook and scanned the last entry, even though I already knew what it would say. The same time. The same note. Another uneventful night. That was the goal. Outside, the rain continued without concern for schedules or shifts. It didn't care who was awake or who wasn't. It just kept falling, patient and consistent, like it had all night to do nothing else. I took a slow breath and let the sound of it settle in. Another night was beginning. And the building was ready to wait. After a while, the rain became something I didn't actively listen to anymore. It settled into the background, like a constant tone the night was built around. I checked the time out of habit, not because it mattered. The early part of the shift always felt the same. Too close to the day to feel fully separate from it, but far enough that nothing unexpected ever happened. The first round was always simple. Front doors. Side entrance. Emergency exit by the elevators. Each one responded the way it should. Locks firm. Hinges quiet. Metal cool beneath my hand. The building didn't resist being checked. It seemed to understand the routine. Back at the desk, the security monitors glowed softly. Small windows into empty spaces. Chairs pushed in. Desks cleared. Hallways waiting without impatience. I watched them without focus, letting my eyes drift from one screen to the next. Nothing moved except the occasional shift of light when rain altered the reflections outside. There was comfort in that. The elevators rested on the ground floor, doors closed, lights dimmed low. They looked less like machines and more like something at rest, conserving energy for later. I stood there for a moment, listening. Buildings never go fully silent. There's always a hum behind the walls, a reminder that something is still working even when no one is watching. Eventually, I took the stairs. The stairwell echoed softly, but I kept my pace slow. Each step landed where it always did. Familiar. Measured. The kind of movement that doesn't ask questions. On the second floor, the lights hummed faintly above the carpet. The air felt different up there. Less polished. More neutral. Like a space designed to be passed through rather than noticed. Rows of workstations sat in orderly lines. Screens dark. Keyboards untouched. The faint outline of fingerprints still visible on some of the glass partitions. I walked the perimeter first, then cut through the center, following paths I'd taken countless times before. The building remembered them even if no one else did. At the far end, windows faced the street. Rain streaked down them in uneven patterns, stretching the city lights into long, pale lines. Cars passed occasionally, tires whispering against wet asphalt. Even the traffic seemed tired. I stood there longer than necessary. Not because I was waiting for something. Just because there was no reason not to. Time moved differently when you stopped checking it. Minutes softened. Edges blurred. The night didn't push forward. It simply unfolded. Back in the stairwell, I paused at the landing and looked down toward the lobby. The lights below faded gradually, step by step, until they reached the desk where I'd started. Everything looked smaller from there. Less demanding. The third floor came next. It always felt quieter, even though there was no real difference. Same layout. Same materials. Same silence. Still, something about it encouraged slower movement, longer pauses. I walked past closed office doors, nameplates dark and unreadable. Some letters had begun to peel, curling slightly at the edges. No one had bothered to fix them. There was no reason to. Rain tapped gently against the windows at the end of the hall, barely audible from this distance. More a suggestion than a sound. I rested my hand against the glass for a moment, feeling the cool surface beneath my palm. Outside, the rain continued its quiet work, tracing paths no one would follow. Eventually, I turned back toward the stairs, letting the floor return to its stillness. The night was only beginning to settle in. There was plenty of time left for it to deepen. By the time I made it back to the lobby, the rain had settled into something almost constant. Not heavier. Just more certain. I sat down behind the desk and let the chair take my weight slowly. The surface was cool through my jacket, firm enough to remind me I was still there. Still awake. Still part of the building's routine. The monitors watched quietly. Floor after floor, nothing out of place. A reflection shifted when a car passed outside, then returned to stillness. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the old machine tucked behind the desk. The sound it made was soft and familiar, like it didn't want to announce itself. The taste was flat, predictable. Exactly what I expected. Somewhere above me, pipes adjusted as hot water cooled. The sound traveled faintly through the structure, barely noticeable unless you were listening for it. I was. I checked the logbook again and marked the time. The page didn't change much from night to night. That was the point. After a few minutes, I stood up and began another round. This time, I took the elevator. The doors closed gently, and the cab began its slow climb. The motion was smooth enough to forget it was happening. Lights passed by in quiet increments, each floor announced only by a soft change in pressure. I stepped out on the fourth floor. It felt wider somehow. Longer corridors. Fewer interruptions. The carpet absorbed sound so completely that my footsteps almost disappeared. Conference rooms lined one side of the hallway. Long tables rested under dim ceiling lights, chairs pushed in with careful symmetry. Whiteboards stood clean and unused, their surfaces reflecting faint outlines of the room. I paused in one doorway and looked in without stepping inside. The room felt untouched, like it was waiting for instructions that would never arrive. Rain traced its way down the far windows, distant and blurred. The city beyond them seemed softer from this height, less defined. As if distance itself worked like insulation. I moved on, hands in my pockets, breathing slow and even. At the end of the hall, a small kitchenette sat dark and unused. A row of cabinets. A sink. A stack of paper cups waiting patiently for a morning that hadn't arrived yet. I didn't turn on the light. Some spaces felt better left as they were, suspended between use and neglect. Back in the elevator, I pressed the button for the basement. The doors opened onto a different kind of quiet. Concrete replaced carpet. The air grew cooler, heavier. The lighting was practical here, unbothered by comfort or mood. Everything existed to function. My footsteps sounded sharper against the floor, but I kept them slow. No echoes rushed ahead of me. They followed, respectful. The mechanical room door remained closed, steady and unyielding. I rested my hand against it briefly, feeling the faint vibration on the other side. Machines working through the night without acknowledgement. Down the corridor, the parking ramp sloped upward toward the street. Tonight, it was empty. No headlights. No movement. Just the suggestion of rain carried in on the air. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing changed. That was enough. When I returned to the elevator and rode it back up, the lobby welcomed me with the same low light and quiet patience it always had. The desk waited. The chair waited. The night continued without comment. Time slipped past in small, unremarkable pieces. By now, the day felt distant. The edges of it had softened, replaced by a steady awareness of the building and the rain. The world had narrowed in a way that made it easier to stay present without effort. I settled back into the chair and watched the monitors again, letting my focus drift without direction. The night didn't need attention to move forward. It only needed someone to remain. And I did. Somewhere in the middle of the shift, the building seemed to settle even further into itself. Not quieter exactly. More settled. Like it had accepted the night as it was and stopped expecting anything else from it. I made another slow round, not because the log demanded it, but because my body remembered the pattern. The desk. The doors. The corridor that curved slightly to the left before straightening out again. My steps landed softly, absorbed by carpet and habit. The rain outside continued at the same measured pace. It no longer felt like weather. It felt structural, as if it were part of the building's design rather than something happening to it. I paused near the main windows and watched the reflections shift. Light from passing cars stretched and dissolved across the glass. Each one arrived briefly, then moved on, leaving the lobby unchanged. There was something reassuring about that. Back at the desk, I adjusted the chair and sat down again. The monitors glowed patiently, their soft light filling the space between movements. Floor numbers. Empty hallways. Doors that stayed closed because there was no reason for them not to. I let my eyes drift without focus. Watching without really seeing. The kind of attention that didn't demand effort. The clock moved forward 1 minute at a time. I didn't follow it closely. The sound of the rain was enough to mark the passage. Every so often, A faint noise traveled through the building. Pipes expanding. Air shifting through vents. Nothing sudden. Nothing that needed to be named. I took a sip of water and set the bottle back down. The desk felt cool beneath my palms. Solid. Familiar. This was the part of the night where everything slowed evenly. No anticipation. No sense of waiting for something to happen. Just the continuation of what had already been happening for hours. I stood up again and walked toward the stairwell. The stairwell always felt separate from the rest of the building. Enclosed. Patient. The walls held the echoes gently, returning them softened and delayed. I climbed without counting floors, letting the steps blur together into a single, unbroken motion. On one of the upper landings, I stopped and leaned lightly against the railing. From here, the lobby lights below looked distant, arranged carefully into shapes that didn't change. I listened. The rain found its way into the soundscape again, faint but steady. Somewhere beyond the walls, water traced the same paths it had been tracing all night. After a moment, I continued on, then eventually turned back down. There was no destination in mind. Only movement. When I returned to the lobby, nothing had shifted. The desk waited. The chair remained where I'd left it. The building hadn't taken advantage of my absence to change. That felt intentional. I sat again and opened the logbook, not to write, but to rest my hand on the page. The paper was smooth, worn in places where hands had lingered before. Other nights. Other people. Same routine. I closed it without adding anything. On the monitors, a single hallway camera flickered slightly, then stabilized. The image sharpened. The corridor remained empty. I didn't react. There was nothing to react to. The rain softened for a few moments, spacing itself out, then returned to its familiar rhythm. It felt like breathing. Slow in. Slow out. My shoulders loosened without instruction. Fatigue arrived gently, settling into muscles rather than thoughts. I let it be there without pushing against it. This was the part of the night I trusted the most. No edges. No surprises. Just time doing what time always does when no one interferes. I stood once more and checked the doors along the lobby. Each one answered the same way it had before. Lock steady. Frames unmoved. The building remained exactly as it was meant to be at this hour. Back at the desk, I adjusted the lamp slightly, shifting the pool of light a few inches to the right. The change was minor, but the space responded immediately, shadows rearranging themselves into something softer. I watched the effect until it felt complete, then stopped thinking about it. Minutes passed. Maybe more. The rain outside continued its quiet work, pressing gently against glass and stone, washing the city into a shape that felt less demanding. I rested my hands in my lap and let my breathing slow to match it. Nothing needed my attention. And for a while, that was enough. As the night moved deeper, it began to feel lighter without becoming bright. Not in color. In weight. The hours behind me no longer pressed forward. They settled where they were, stacked quietly, leaving the present moment thin and open. The rain outside continued, softer now, with longer pauses between each drop. I stayed at the desk longer than before. The chair supported me without asking for movement. The monitors hummed faintly, their glow steady and calm. Nothing demanded to be checked again. Nothing suggested it had changed while I wasn't looking. I listened instead. Rain against glass. Air through vents. The distant, steady hum of the city doing what it always did when most of it was asleep. I shifted slightly and let my feet rest flat against the floor. The coolness traveled upward slowly, grounding me in the space. The building felt awake in the way animals do when they're resting with one eye open. Present, but not alert. At some point, I stood and walked the lobby once more. This time without any pattern in mind. No route to complete. Just movement to remind my body it still existed beyond the chair. The reflections in the glass had changed again. Less motion now. Fewer cars passing. The city outside felt farther away, like it had taken a step back to make room for morning later on. I stopped near the windows and watched the rain thin itself out. Drops arrived individually now, each one distinct. When they landed, they stayed visible longer, sliding slowly before disappearing. It felt deliberate. Back at the desk, I turned the lamp down slightly. Not off. Just lower. The edge of the light softened, spreading more gently across the floor. Shadows retreated without complaint. I sat and let my breathing slow further, matching the quieter rhythm of the space. Thoughts came and went without forming lines. Not memories. Not plans. Just impressions drifting through and leaving again before they could settle. This was the hour that belonged to no one. Too late to belong to the night. Too early to belong to the day. The building seemed to recognize it too. Systems cycled more slowly. Sounds arrived with less urgency. Even the rain felt like it was listening to itself. I rested my hands on the desk and closed my eyes briefly. Not to sleep. Just to remove one layer of attention. When I opened them again, the monitors looked the same. The lobby looked the same. The world had not taken the opportunity to rearrange itself. That felt right. I checked the logbook once more, tracing the edge of the page with my thumb. There was still time left before anything needed to be marked. I let the pen stay where it was. Minutes passed unnoticed. Outside, the sky shifted almost imperceptibly. Not lighter yet. Just less dense. The darkness loosened its hold without letting go. I stood again and walked toward the entrance, stopping just short of the doors. The glass felt cool beneath my palm. Solid. Real. Beyond it, the rain continued to fade, leaving behind a quiet that felt wider than before. I stayed there for a moment, then turned back toward the desk. There was nothing left to prepare for. Nothing left to anticipate. Only the steady presence of the building and the time it kept without asking to be noticed. I returned to the chair and sat, letting the remaining minutes stretch gently around me. The night had done what it needed to do. And it was almost ready to hand things back. Sometime after that, the sense of time began to loosen its grip. Minutes still passed, but they no longer asked to be counted. The rain outside remained steady, a soft presence pressing against the windows without insistence. It had become part of the building's breathing, rising and falling in a rhythm that felt older than the night itself. I shifted slightly in the chair and let my shoulders relax. The desk lamp cast a small island of light across the surface, leaving the rest of the lobby in shadow. It felt intentional, like the building had decided how much of itself it wanted to show. On the monitors, nothing changed. And that was reassuring. I stood and walked the lobby slowly, tracing the same path I'd taken countless times before. The tile floor reflected the overhead lights in muted patches. Every sound felt rounded at the edges, softened by the late hour. Near the entrance, the glass doors showed a faint reflection of my own shape, distorted slightly by rain and darkness. Just a suggestion of a person, standing where someone was meant to stand. I didn't linger. The stairwell welcomed me again with its gentle echoes. I climbed without counting the steps, letting muscle memory decide the pace. The effort was minimal, familiar enough that it barely registered. On the 5th floor, the air felt stiller than the rest. Not quieter, just heavier. The hallway stretched longer here, with fewer interruptions. Office doors lined both sides, their windows dark, blinds half drawn. Inside, desks waited in silence, papers left exactly where they'd been placed days before. I passed a small seating area near the corner, chairs arranged around a low table. Someone had left a magazine there, folded open to a page that would never be read. It felt wrong to touch it, so I didn't. Rain traced slow lines down the windows at the far end of the hall. From this height, the city lights blurred into something abstract, like a painting left out in the weather too long. I stood there and watched without focus. The night didn't ask for interpretation. It only existed. Back in the stairwell, I paused halfway down and rested my hand against the railing. The metal felt cool and steady beneath my fingers. Solid. Unconcerned. There was a faint sound somewhere deep in the building, not sudden, not sharp. Just the quiet shift of systems adjusting themselves. A reminder that even stillness had movement inside it. When I reached the lobby again, the chair accepted me without complaint. I sat and let my gaze settle on the monitors once more, though my attention wandered easily. This was usually the part of the shift when thoughts drifted without direction. Not memories exactly. More like impressions. Fragments that surfaced and faded without asking to be followed. I remembered other nights, other buildings, all blending together in the same muted palette. Different layouts. Same quiet. Same rain, more often than not. Someone once asked me if it ever got lonely. I never knew how to answer that. Lonely implied wanting something else. I didn't. The building didn't either. Another few minutes slipped by unnoticed. The rain softened slightly, then returned to its steady pace. Like it had paused only to remind itself to continue. I adjusted the angle of the desk lamp, just enough to shift the shadow across the floor. The change was small, but noticeable. Sometimes that was all it took to reset the night. I checked the log again and marked the time with the same careful motion as before. The pen moved smoothly. The page accepted it. Outside, the sky remained dark, untroubled by any hint of morning. There was still plenty of night left to hold. I leaned back, closed my eyes briefly, and listened. The building stayed with me. And the rain did too. At some point, the quiet began to change its texture. Not in volume. In quality. It felt thinner, stretched slightly by the hours that had already passed. The rain outside continued, steady as ever, but the way it sounded against the glass carried a hint of distance now, like it had moved a step farther away. I stood up and walked the lobby again, slower than before. My body moved without instruction. The routine had settled deep enough that I didn't have to think about where I was going. The doors reflected the lights behind me and the rain beyond them. Inside and outside layered together until the difference felt less important. I checked the locks again, even though I knew they hadn't changed. Metal met metal. Solid. Certain. The elevator waited with its doors closed. I pressed the call button and watched the small light respond. The doors opened quietly, as if aware of the hour. I took it up to the 3rd floor this time. Something about that level always felt balanced, as though it existed exactly where it was meant to. The lights hummed faintly overhead. The carpet softened each step until sound became optional. I walked the length of the hallway without stopping. Past doors. Past darkened windows. Past rooms that would fill again later, when the day returned with its noise and expectations. At the end, I paused near the window. Rain slid down the glass in slow, deliberate paths. Streetlights blurred into soft halos. Somewhere below, a car passed, its sound barely reaching this height. The city was waking in small ways. Not people. Systems. I could feel it in the building too. Not movement yet. Just readiness. Back at the desk, the clock advanced without urgency. The hands moved the way they always did, indifferent to who was watching. I poured the last of the coffee out and rinsed the cup. The sink echoed briefly, then went quiet again. The smell of it faded, replaced by the neutral scent of the lobby. On the monitors, the image quality seemed slightly different. Not brighter. Just clearer. As if the night had shifted its angle. I sat and let my shoulders drop. Fatigue had arrived quietly, without announcement. Not the heavy kind. Just enough to soften the edges of thought. This was the hour when the night felt longest, even though it was nearly over. I checked the log one more time and marked the entry with care. Same handwriting. Same line weight. The page held all of it without judgment. Somewhere deep in the building, a system cycled. Air moved. Temperature adjusted. The structure preparing itself without needing instruction. Outside, the rain began to thin, not stopping, just spacing itself out. Drops arrived with more distance between them, each one distinct. I stood by the window again and watched. The sky was still dark, but it had changed in a way that didn't need explanation. A subtle shift. A quiet signal that time was moving forward whether anyone noticed or not. I stayed there, hands resting lightly against the glass, until the moment passed on its own. There was still work to do. Still time to keep. The night wasn't finished yet. But it was learning how to let go. By then, the rain had nearly finished saying what it needed to say. It hadn't stopped completely. It had just learned how to fall with more space between each drop. I moved through the lobby one last time, not as a check, but as a habit completing itself. The floor reflected the lights with less distortion now. Everything looked clearer, more settled. The doors remained locked. The building remained calm. I stood behind the desk and straightened the chair, though no one would notice if I hadn't. Some actions didn't need an audience. They only needed to be done. On the monitors, the image held steady. The same empty floors. The same quiet rooms. Nothing waiting to surprise anyone. That felt right. I closed the logbook and placed it back where it belonged. The cover met the desk with a soft sound, final without being loud. Another night recorded. Another line added without comment. Outside, the sky had shifted just enough to suggest direction. Not light yet. Just the absence of complete darkness. The rain thinned further, each drop now distinct, careful where it landed. The city held still beneath it, as if respecting the moment. I took a slow breath and let it out without effort. There was nothing left to watch for. Nothing left to listen closely to. The building knew what to do next. It always did. I stepped toward the doors and paused briefly, looking back across the lobby. The lights. The desk. The quiet that had held everything together through the night. Then I turned away. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Less patient. Behind me, the building remained exactly where it was, waiting without urgency for the day to return and fill it again. The rain continued for a while longer, softer now, falling on a place that had already learned how to rest. And with that, the night let go.